Welcome to Schooled by Mr. Bascom. I have been working with young people for 27 years plus now, and I've loved it, all of it, even the tough times. And I kind of want to use this time to reconnect with former students, see where they are in their life, see the impact of their education and their time in my class on their lives and where they are now, and just see how they've progressed in that time, and hopefully share a couple of laughs while we're doing it. Hey, it's Mr. Bascom. Welcome back to Schooled by Mr. Bascom, Mr. Bascom's class, like the name of my podcast. I decided to dip my toe back in the water of podcasting a little bit. I miss it. I have a little bit of extra time, and I had a few things I wanted to talk about. So, enjoy. So, how are you? I'm just kind of riffing about a bunch of different ideas right now. One of the things that I'm looking at is getting students more engaged in the material. I try really hard every day to try and make my class as interesting as possible. I think to me, social studies sells itself. I think it's just a really easy subject to tell stories about, to engage people with, to connect to everyday life. And over the years, it's worked pretty well. I mean, it's going to be in 2 weeks' time, it'll be 28 years that I've been teaching. And over most of that time, as I've been teaching 7th and 8th grade social studies, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback. And and I think the number one thing is that I try to make make the material connectable, something that you can relate to, so that these people that we're learning about in these events we're learning about aren't abstract, that they resonate with you, that they connect to things that you've read or you've watched or you've experienced. And I try that really hard. But a key part for me in teaching in this style is getting feedback, and one of the challenges since COVID began and dealing with all of this is I can't see all students' faces. Since we're back in school, it's a lot better than it was full remote, because remote, I would never see a lot of the kids at all. They'd keep their cameras off, and I have to prompt them just to even type okay or get any sort of feedback at all besides doing the work. And now that we've been back, it's been better, but I think because kids were home for so long, there has been sort of a disconnect as far as interacting, with each other. It's been a little bit better, but when it comes to a group, um, it's almost sometimes like students are almost like walking emojis, I joke and say. It's sort of like they'll nod, they'll show, a little bit maybe, but they don't want to really give very much. They're like an emoji, just that'll say what I mean, and that's enough. There's not really an elaboration. And then with the mask covering their faces too, I can't see smiles or get feedback the same way. I can't hear students the same way. So it's been really limited. So that's really one of the things that, one of the challenges that I've been contending with. And I guess all of us have been contending with. And it's not students' fault, it's nobody's fault. This COVID situation has been terrible for going on 2 years now. And while it seems to be getting a little bit better, I don't know if it's going to resolve itself in time to, for things to get back to normal for this school year. I'm hopeful for next school year, but um, this year's already is halfway over, and I don't see things dramatically changing yet. I'm hoping maybe the last month or two of school, maybe, but realistically, I'm hoping for next year. But one of the things I do need from my students, and if you're listening to this, you might have been a former student of mine, you might be a current student, more than likely, you're probably a former student. And some of you might be old enough that you have kids now of your own, and which is amazing. It tells you how long I've been doing this. But one of the things that I encourage learners of all ages to do is talk about what you've learned. Don't just kind of receive it passively. Have that conversation after the fact with somebody, or talk to the person that's giving you the information or providing the information. Ask them follow-up questions. And whether it's an actively learning situation where you're in a classroom or taking some sort of a class online or in college or whatever it may be, or you're just conversing with somebody, I really feel that people, by staying away physically and staying distant, I see sort of a lapse in the ability to kind of communicate, to ask follow-up questions, to show evidence that you're really listening to the other person, you know. And even with the advance of phone usage and emojis, it's easier to just put a thumbs up thing or a happy face emoji rather than, saying, yes, I get it. That was really good. Like sometimes I know for myself, I need that. I kind of run on that positive interaction and communication and conference and conversation, and I really think that's something um, that we all can get better at as teachers, trying to elicit that response, but also as learners in general, like showing the person you're listening, not just by looking at them. That's the first thing. You should always be looking at them, but also from, and not just from nodding. That's a little bit more, or even saying, yeah, I agree. That's great. But it's also got to be where you're asking follow-up questions or telling them, yeah, I agree with you. That's true. That makes sense. I was just talking about that. Or, I always wondered about, and being willing to give that next step. And a lot of people aren't good at that even before COVID. I don't want to blame all of this just on COVID, but I do know that in the last year, it's become more pronounced in the classroom more than I've ever seen it. So it was just something that was on my mind, and I'm trying to come up with different ways to get my students more engaged. I'm never going to stop. The day I stop doing that is the day I start putting in my retirement papers, and I'm not quite there yet, but um, it's something that was on my mind, and it kind of connects to the next thing I'm talking about in that. Um, African American History Month, February is African American History Month, and I really want and encourage people to understand that history is not just about older, rich white men, and I don't think that's part of critical race theory or anything like that, like some crazies think, but oftentimes history is just told from that perspective, and there's other stories out there, and there's other people that had an impact and that don't get addressed, and I think February in particular, giving the opportunity for people of color, particularly African American people, to speak about their own stories and their own experiences, their own influences is really important. Um, Sometimes people say dumb things like, "Oh, well, what about White History Month?" And that's frustrating to me. It's sort of if you've been in a classroom at all in your life, you know that 90% plus, 95% plus of the people you've heard about are talking from a white perspective, and in general, a white man perspective. So the idea of just trying to allot a little bit of time, to speak about other perspectives and other stories that maybe are lesser told, I think is a really positive thing. This sort of connects to what I was saying, though, about interaction and that engagement with the material. I kind of created an assignment, but it was an opportunity for students to get a little bit of community service hours, to get a little bit of extra credit. And I wrote something up this morning where basically I gave them a list of like 60 people, African American peoples of note, starting all the way back from like Sojourner Truth and Nat Turner through Ida Wells into Booker T. Washington, all the way up to more modern people and more known people like Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, up to Barack Obama and artists of today and scientists and every kind of walk of life, not just entertainment and not just being a president. And I'm encouraging students. Listen, here's a few websites. Write 2 or 3 paragraphs and read it into your phone. You can make a video, you can make an audio clip, and submit it to me. And I offered students anywhere from 1 up to 5 hours of community service. It should probably take them maybe 15, 20 minutes to do. So they're kind of getting a lot more reward than their time would indicate. But it's sort of like I just want them to get immersed in the material, and I'm trying to offer them an incentive. And some students, three students, um, jumped at the offer and said, "Oh, I'll do this person," and all they had to do is submit a Google form, tell me which person. And so 3 of them did that, but I have 98th graders, and today's a day off. It's a Lunar New Year, it's a Chinese New Year, so this year the New York City schools are closed today. So I put up the assignment, I don't know, I guess 10 o'clock this morning, 11 o'clock this morning. So it's only maybe 6 hours later. So maybe some students, slept late and enjoyed their day off and weren't like married to their device that as far as schoolwork and looking up the assignment. But I was a little disappointed to see only 3 students so far, even with the incentive. And part of that is, yeah, students want their downtime, just like I do, just like any of us do. But I think part of it is, well, if I don't have to do this, then I'm not going to. And I think that is reflective of a bigger problem, sort of an apathy that creeps in with sometimes with students, particularly eighth graders, because they're their last year in my school at Van Nest Academy, and they're preparing to go to high school. So they're kind of, in some ways, they act as though they're over it. They're over the middle school experience. They're over extra work. They're over those things. They're more caught up in the social element of life, their friends, social media, um, that sort of interaction, and the idea of kind of diving in more to your work for some students, they almost perceive that as nerdy, or something they just don't want to do, something ew. And I get that on some level. I mean, I was an eighth grader a million years ago, and my family, they weren't the biggest, most studious people in the world, so I get it more so from them. My kids are very studious, but even them, they want some time off. You know, they don't want to constantly be doing work all the time. So I get it on some level, but sometimes I'm looking for students to kind of find another step in themselves. A lot of times I tell them, if you could be great, why wouldn't you be great? And, I don't know that young people all the time realize the potential they have, what they can do with themselves if they just apply themselves a little bit more. And they're content to stay in their space. And then after the fact, later on, when things don't go as well as they'd hoped, then there's a lot of complaining. Oh, that class was boring. That teacher didn't like me. That school was crazy. Um, I'm distracted from things at home. But my eighth graders, my seventh graders too, but especially my eighth graders, they're getting to that teenage year a little bit, that angsty part of their life, that more self-absorbed part of their life sometimes. And I feel, and it's not just that. For some people, it never stops. It continues into their 20s, 30s, and beyond. But I really, I'm looking for my young people, my learners, to kind of push themselves, especially when they don't want to. You know, apply themselves when they're tired, when they're frustrated, when they're bored, when they're distracted. With my football team at Columbus this past year, I used to talk about something like, can you be right when everything's not right? Can you still push when you're tired, when you're hurt, when your girlfriend's fighting with you, when your parents are giving you a hard time, when you're wondering if you're going to pass or fail a class? When you have all those other distractions, can you still find the focus when you need to? And that's the difference between good and great. And a lot of them seem to get that message. And I kind of want that message to resonate a little bit more with my young learners. And it's this podcast here that I'm doing right now, this episode, I guess it's the first one I'm doing in like almost 5 months. And usually for a long time I would interview somebody, and that was great. I still want to do that. But a family friend of mine, Jared, he does a podcast of his own called The Spiritual Experience. And listening to him sometimes just riff by himself, I found that really engaging. And I was like, he had something valid to say, and he's a very good storytelling way about him. And truth be told, and I kind of gassing myself up and saying this a little bit maybe, but I feel like I have a good storytelling way about myself, and I have a way that works with younger people. So I'm kind of using this avenue, this media that I haven't used in a while via the podcast, to sort of talk to whoever's listening on the other side, and maybe get them thinking a little bit more about how can I apply myself a little bit more, especially when it's worth learning about, whether it's African American history or American history or current events in the news, or applying yourself at whatever skill that it is that intrigues you on some level. Can you push yourself? Can you give more when you don't feel like giving more? Can you be right when everything's not right? And I'm challenged by my students every day, and using this assignment I gave them, this incentive assignment I offered them, I don't expect all of them to turn around tomorrow and give me 50 of them, but 3 out of 90 is kind of low. And it makes me wonder, like, wait, am I asking too much of them? You know, like, to me, I would have been ecstatic to get 15 out of 90. That would have been 12 out of 90. Three seems low, and it's still early. It hasn't even been 12 hours. Who knows? This turns, you know. But I'm hoping that this is just kind of, winter doldrums and dealing with COVID and having a day off and just trying to turn down the lights and lower the shades and just have a chill day. It could be that too. But I do feel like in interacting with a lot of people, both in the classroom, on the football field, uh, in real life, on social media, in all these different ways. Sometimes people almost seem proud to not apply themselves. Like, oh, look at all these people working. What's wrong with them? And it's sort of like, I get it sometimes, and sometimes it's just funny. You see a funny meme or GIF or GIF, however you want to pronounce it, and you're gonna go with that because you think it's funny. But I also think sometimes people are just sort of like, no, really, what's wrong with you wanting to give more effort? And that to me is a little scary. You know, can you give more? Should you give more? Should you want to give more? I would argue you should. You don't have to be nonstop. You should appreciate your downtime. You should take your you time and max that out. But it can't forever be the excuse, can it? You know, I mean, me, sometimes I push myself. My dad thinks I'm crazy for as hard as I work sometimes. To me, it doesn't feel like work because I really enjoy the things I'm doing, whether it's teaching or coaching or managing my daughter's softball team or um, just doing the everyday life things. It doesn't feel like burdensome to me most times. When it does, I take a minute. I need to keep my mental health. I need to keep my sanity. I need to find the things that bring me relief when I am feeling a little overwhelmed because we all feel it. But I feel like for my young learners, especially, they have to develop that resilience, that willingness to say, all right, I'm tired, but this is not the end of the world. Like, no, let's not act like we're overburdened all the time, you know? And so, just to kind of close this out, the idea of applying yourself in school, applying yourself to kind of get something done that's going to help you learn about history, help you learn about your own self and the people around you, and just developing that stronger work ethic, especially in the times when you don't feel like doing it. I really think it's worth it. I do. Um, so I know I kind of threw a whole lot of things in there. I hope you don't mind if you're listening. If you are listening, thank you. Keep listening. Spread the word. Share this with other people. Um, my podcast is called Schooled by Mr. Bascom. It's on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all that stuff. And I haven't done one in a while. So this is the one I'm going to put out there. I'll probably chop it up a little bit so it sounds a little bit neater and a little shorter. But I'm hoping you guys listen and you give me some feedback, you know, and hopefully you use the things that we're talking about here a little bit, on some level, maybe not directly, maybe on some, sub level where you're just sort of like, yeah, that makes sense. I was just thinking of that. And maybe it motivates you, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just click to the next thing you're doing in your life, and that's good too. Sometimes we just need a minute when we're riding our bike or, in the gym or driving to work or in the bathroom or whatever. But, so that's what podcasts can be for some people. But, I'm hoping to help. Hopefully this was. All right, guys. Some good feedback would help. And maybe I'll do this again real soon. I'd like to. All right, guys. Stay safe. Talk to you all soon. All right. Well, that was my first podcast in 5 months. I've done a bunch of live streams, but I haven't really just done this in a while. And for this one in particular, where I just kind of riffed by myself, it's interesting. It was kind of, put myself vulnerable a little bit, just not talking to anyone back, hoping somebody's listening, otherwise, so I don't feel totally stupid for just talking into a mic. But I hope you liked it. And like I said at the end of my podcast, I hope you subscribe and spread the word. Thanks. Be good.